sun flying high in the sky till the day is done.
I can't break away.
Like a child in his fantasy, punching holes in the walls of reality. All my life I wanted to fly, but I don't have the wings, and I wonder why.
I can't
Break away. Oh, well, Mama told me when I was young, stand tall, girl, you're number one. But you can be what you wanna be, but you can't change the course of your destiny. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. I can't break away. Well, no, I can't break away. Ooh, I can't break away.
Greetings, my excellent friend.
Greetings, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. Episode 1.16 of Fixer's Heavy Metal History, where we will see the French monarchy pretty much come to an end tonight in the insurrection of August the 10th, 1792. Enigma, I'm so very happy you were able to make it. I know that you strolled into my stream this week, and you found me playing Destiny when you had been referred to as a history place. This is History Night. Hey, look at that. My phone's going off. Let me mute that so that's not annoying all night. So here, let me get through a few things quick before we get going tonight. The first thing is Turi, 14 months, tier 1. Thank you very much. Gilly, Fletch, thank you for the hosts. As is what we do here all the time, our bits, subs, and Streamloots packs benefit disabled American veterans. So this is your impact for the month of period of August to September of this year. The donation that was filed this past week was $260. That includes a $100 contribution from my very own mom and dad, which I am just humbled by that they would continue to support everything that I do. But that's going to continue into the month of October. We will continue to use all of the bits, subs, and packs to support disabled American veterans, but starting next Friday night and running through the entire month of October, there will be an additional 2 to 3 streams per week that will be gaming related, during which you will be able to scare me. It's being called Scare Drive. Sturf, thank you for the host. What Scare Drive is going to be is I'll be playing games, mostly Destiny. You'll be able to get free packs of cards, but a $10 donation will play one of 11 screams and alert on the screen thanking you for your donation, which I don't look at the chat that much when I'm playing Destiny, so it's a really great opportunity to do what you guys have wanted to do for, 4 years, which is get me back a little bit. For all the shade I throw, this is your chance to get me for a month. Theming it around Halloween a little bit, but we're going to be benefiting a distinctly different charity called Stop Soldier Suicide, and what they aim to do is to lower the suicide rate among active duty and veterans by 40% by the year 2030. That would bring it more in line with norms for the population, suicide not being normal, but the active duty and veteran demographic of the people in the United States is way high, and something has to be done, and this group is doing something toward that end. If we raise $1,000 in October, which I'm sure we're gonna, I will go get an Outlaw's tattoo up here on my shoulder joint above my existing tattoo that I got whenever I was in the military. This tattoo that you guys would never get to see is extremely meaningful to me, though it doesn't mean anything to you. It was gotten between 4 people that we considered ourselves brothers. So the idea that I'm going to get this Outlaw's tattoo above that on my arm is significantly meaningful to me. So we raised $1,000. That's what we're going to do. The troll will become the troll-E for 1 month, yes. Mads was concerned that I'm a little too stalwart to be startled. There certainly will be times where I catch it, but $10 toward a good cause is $10 toward a good cause. If you donate $50 at a pop, you will get 70 packs of Streamloots cards for whatever game I'm playing at that time, probably Destiny. That is better than $1 a pack. That is much cheaper than you would be able to get them if you bought them directly from the Streamloots store. I will do my best to deliver them the moment the donation is made, but I'll also be a little bit reliant upon my moderators to help me take care of that as well. That is what is coming starting next Friday night at 8 p.m. right after my friend Gilly finishes up his stream. We will start the scare drive, and then it'll roll all the way through Halloween. You guys have always supported the good causes around here, as this over here on this side shows. We did great work. Operation Panda, by the way, I was informed that all of the debt surrounding that is now gone. We put a big chunk of that to bed last year for a very good friend of ours, and that is now completely off their plate. So we do good things. We do really good things to the community. 10 gift subs rolling in the door from Anonymous. Kays gets one. VT, Jump High for Pie, Brent, Marcus, Sturm, Slack, Enigma gets one, and you have access to all of our fine emotes for 1 whole month. Should take you almost to the end of Scare Drive. Thank you very much. But this community has always done great things. I'm counting on you to do great things in the month of October, plus providing a bit of an incentive for you to be able to scare the bejesus out of me. That said, let's get that off the screen. Let's bring up our whiteboard for tonight. We'll get rolling into tonight's lesson. One other thing, our good friend Intent Rocket is not here tonight. She's traveling. Gilly and Sturf, who are right behind her on the leaderboard for the quiz at the end, this is your chance. I put 14 questions down tonight to give you that extra little bit, maybe, to try to get up and catch... Yeah, cracks knuckles. So, this is your shot. This is your shot to catch up. All I'm going to say is use those cards correctly, because there's a really good chance that you guys could close the gap on her a little bit tonight. Gilly shouldn't be here either. Yes, Gilly was supposed to also be out of here. Turi, again, thank you for the sub. Welcome in. Gilly wasn't supposed to be here either, but travel plans shifted, and now, thankfully for me, one of my best friends and very loyal moderator is here as well. So we're going to get into what happens in the aftermath of the demonstration of June 20th, 1792, which we talked about at the end of last night's stream. We also were talking about the early days and final phases. The final phases of in the early days following France's declaration of war against Austria and Prussia in the spring of 1792. We went through that quick and embarrassing self-rout of the French army, including that mob execution of General Dillon after he decided to hide inside someone's house, taking his uniform coat off, which is pretty stupid. We talked about how that military failure led to an additional conspiracy theory, excuse-making by Jacques-Pierre Brissot at the time, back at home in Paris. Don't forget, there's a giveaway tonight, exclamation point giveaway to get in. But Brissot kind of went crazy whenever that first initial battle that really wasn't a battle happened near Lille. He began fear-mongering not only about this external Austrian plot that was happening, but now about an internal one, about how elements within the military and within the royal family were just working to hand it all over to Austria. Okay, that's what I was afraid of. It's still saying you don't have the necessary tributes, but it entered. Okay, Enigma doesn't have the necessary tributes. Fletch doesn't have the necessary tributes. So it's 2,000 tributes to get into the giveaway. So Fletch, if you wouldn't mind giving me a tributes real quick in chat to make sure that that's accurate. Exclamation point tributes. Because, yeah, it's just to keep people who aren't here all the time from rolling in. But Fletch, if you wouldn't mind just making sure that that my code is correct, because I was trying to make sure that, you know. Yeah, that one worked for Enigma, for sure. Enigma gets his mug, though. If I enter it, let me see. Yeah, I don't want to enter it because I don't want to be in the pool. But if Fletch could hit exclamation, there we go. That's why you can't get in, Fletch. You know what? Because it's the first month and everybody's here, we're going to do this just to make sure that the thing is working. We're going to give all the early birds this so they can get in and get in on the giveaway. Is that different from channel points? Absolutely. Tributes is something that is held in the bot. Eddie and his pile of tributes. It is my bot currency, not a... It's been the currency we've held over since we were on Mixer. Dustin starts the muster. That is also your chance to get some tributes if you don't have it in your pocket. But again, exclamation point giveaway. That'll get you in. You should have enough tributes now if you were here early. But it is kind of a thing to prevent people from just rolling in and saying, oh, giveaway. I want something for free. It's a book. The people who get into the giveaway, we want them to want to read or experience the book. It's called The Black Count. It's by Tim Reese. It's about Alexandre Dumas' father, Charles Alexandre Dumas, who was a contemporary of Napoleon and a French general. And he was black. And that's crazy for the time in our Western brains here in America that there was a black general in France at the end of the 18th century. All right, if we have any more problems with it tonight, we'll take care of it. But again, exclamation point giveaway should get you into the pool. And we're going to keep rolling. So we talked about last week how that self-route was embarrassing. General Dillon, got killed by mob execution. And then Brissot starts his fear-mongering at home, not only of the external Austrian plot, but the internal plot to, lose the war and hand it all over to the Austrians. And the revolution at this time, and to this point, had largely played out against this backdrop of peace, where it had been a theoretical threat of external aggression, but now that was no longer an exercise of oratory and theater and theory and all the clubs and within the assemblies. It was here. War was here, right? And the fights that the various political factions were having prior to war, they were pretty heated, but they hadn't been outright dangerous. They hadn't been personally, the potential for personal injury hadn't been there, and that's about to change. The early military failure that occurred now presented this mortal threat at the hands of a foreign enemy to everyone who was still arguing inside of Paris. The fear inside Paris of the Austrians and the Prussians, who I will now start calling the Allies, Austria, Prussia, and whomever else moves to that left side of at war with France. I'm just going to start calling them the Allies versus saying Austria, Prussia, next nation, next nation, next nation. That can get a little bit wordy. So the Allies, in this context, will refer to those at war with France, even though in our Western modern history brains we like to associate that with those who fought Germany in the 20th century. The Allies is a reference to those who are at war with France.
Another soul battered and broken, cast aside like a spent torch.
See you in a little bit, Fletch. So, this fear is palpable inside Paris now. It's not a theory that Brissot is just barking about over the winter of 1791, 1792, but it's a real thing. And it raises the stakes, and it makes everyone, everywhere, willing to do anything. And the revolution, as it enters this new phase, is going to become extremely vicious and bloody from this point forward. And following that failure of General Dillon's vanguard, I did make mention that the Allies were not in a position to respond yet, meaning they didn't counter. Remember, we talked about cavalry charges and routing armies, and that's when armies lose, is when they break. They weren't in a position to do anything to the French army that day, nor really strategically for a period of months. And seeing how the French had conducted themselves that day, the Allied armies weren't really in that big of a hurry. They were really content to just patiently allow the war to let France devour itself internally. They took their time. And then last week we carried that internal narrative of French politics, especially from the perspective of Brissot and Louis' termination of the Girondin ministry, and then the demonstration of June 20th to this domestic precipice that we talked about. And during that time, literally nothing was occurring on the war front, right? That battle happened in late spring, early summer. That battle, it really wasn't a battle. And then nothing really happens from a war perspective throughout the summer. The Allies don't press their advantage. And the three leading generals for France, you'll remember Rochambeau, Lafayette, and Luckner. Rochambeau's already resigned after he sends this letter back to the assembly. It was co-signed by Lafayette and Luckner, saying, you guys should sue for peace because we're not in any shape to fight. No real fighting occurred. And through May and June, the Allies coordinated their staffs, finalized their plans, and put troops into position, but no fighting happened. The Allies went about everything as if they had all the time in the world, and quite frankly, I wouldn't blame them for having that understanding of things strategically. They just saw their enemy, who is all foam and no bite really, just run, scared themselves out of their own socks at the thought of having an actual fight. And the Allies thought the only mistake they could make was moving too quickly and making a mistake of their own. Just, making a blunder that creates an opening for the French to exploit. So they took their time. They just patiently moved everything into position. I wonder if the Allied army at the border wasn't just the final stage of saber rattling. Maybe. I think that potentially could be conceived to be true, where okay, we all declared war, and there hasn't really been a real fight yet, and we're putting all these troops here, and this is your very last, super duper last chance to stop this war that's about to happen, because look, we're here now. Are you sure that's possible? So we're going to get into the first topic. Yeah, calm the F down or else. It's not a bad way to put it. So we're going to get into the first topic tonight, which is I've called fractures. So we're going to take a huge step back from the war front, right? Because that's not what tonight's about at all. I just wanted you guys to not think throughout the discourse of this evening's events that there was something else happening out there on the war that I'm going to circle back to next week. I'm really not. There's nothing happening out there from the perspective of anyone invading. Now, next week, that's going to change, and the state of domestic France is going to be very different when that occurs, and it's going to feed into a lot of things. But that troop movement isn't happening tonight, and nothing is going to happen in your brain. You should basically think from the moment General Dillon decided to run with his troops and take his uniform coat off until the end of tonight, there's really nothing happening from the perspective of the War of the First Coalition.
Yes, I'm excited about this game.
But back in Paris, in comparison to the Allies, there was nothing that we can call careful or patient or deliberate about what's going to happen. Fear had absolutely gripped the city, and it's really important at this point in this story that you begin to encapsulate Paris as its own thing. There's Paris, and then there's kind of the rest of France. And up to this point, it's kind of been Paris flows down to the departments, right? Where things that happen in Paris tend to become things that are adopted within the greater scheme of France. We saw that, with the commune government system, and then the way in which the local electors all kind of stood up regionally around France and became their own governmental entities within cities. And it seemed to be very smooth, the way in which whatever Paris was doing was generally accepted by the rest of France. You need to put a wall around Paris now, because that's not going to be the case moving forward either. The rest of France is going to look around at Paris and go like, what the heck is going on there? Because after tonight, after June 20th, that really becomes a sentiment where the departmental entities, and there's various sentiment all around each different, district and city and department, but broadly speaking, and painting with that broad brush, it's not all smooth and everyone's on the same page from the perspective of the revolution anymore. But fear gripped Paris.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Rumors were swirling in tight circles that Rochambeau, Lafayette, and Luckner, those are the three commanders of the three major French armies, were about to just tell their army to put their guns down, to lay down their cannon and surrender. That the Allies were just going to be here in Paris any minute. And the king was planning a coup, and the mobs were planning to rise up. That one's true. But the effect of all of these swirling fears and rumors and accusations caused this whirlwind about what the greatest threat to France was, who was to blame, and what should be done. That sudden, really not that sudden, but sudden mob demonstration of June 20th, which had been relatively peaceful, but you'll recall they pushed their way into the Legislative Assembly in the Menage, and I did put a pip marker on the map of Paris, that black marker. That is where the Tweelery Palace complex is. It's not labeled on this map we've been using, but that's where it is in relationship to the Palais Royal and the Hotel de Ville and all these places we've talked about for months now. That black marker is basically, this is where the King and Queen's palace is, this is where the Menage is, where the Legislative Assembly meets. But remember, that demonstration of June 20th had pushed into the Legislative Assembly and then forced their way into the actual apartments of the royal family, where everyone just kind of walked past the king, and someone pushed a Phrygian cap in his hand and put a glass of wine in his hand, and Louis played the scene as best as he could. But that was the scene in June of 1792. But that demonstration fractured things further with respect to domestic unity. The radical leaders in Paris, this is the street radicals, exactly, toast to the nation when he got a glass of wine. The radical leaders in Paris believed the king was an enemy, that the generals leading the army were traitors, and that the monarchy's very existence now was a threat to the nation, while at the same time, the general populace out there in the departments saw the mob actions as usurpation of a constitutional government. They abhorred the fact that this small group was outsizing their influence for France broadly in the grand scheme. They had just gone outside the lanes of governmental operations on their own and decided that they didn't like the way in which this constitutional monarchy was doing things, and said, we're going to choose to act out on our own and shake the very foundations of what makes this still work. Because remember, it's not 1789 anymore. We are now 3 years past that point, basically. And we've gone through a 30-month period with the National Assembly where France as a whole body kind of rolled toward this new day, this new dawn, with feudalism dead. And now the rest of France looks at what happened on June 20th and said, wait a minute. Why do those scummy, unwashed masses feel they have the right to do what they're doing? Who are they? And it wasn't just the bourgeoisie, that upper middle class crust, that was saying that. It was everybody. Who are they to just march through and decide the fate of the rest of France on a whim with a pitchfork and a rifle?
No way!
Yes way. So inside the Legislative Assembly, those who fell into that category of Girondin. Remember, Girondin's not a political club, nor is it a party or a voting bloc. It's just a group of people who kind of came together in Madame Roland's salon. But they were now really officially nervous about the mobs. Even though the mobs were demonstrating due to the termination, at least in part, they were demonstrating due to the termination of the Girondin ministry. Remember, those Girondin ministers were kicked out when Madame Roland's husband decided to write a letter to the King of France publicly bashing him, which is a big, big no-no. So he fired the whole group. The generals on the front realized that the weakness of the French army was a real thing, and they believed that France was threatened by the radicals and the demagogues, the people who are using the current set of circumstances as an excuse to get power and get things the way they wanted, like Brissot. He would be a demagogue. They believed that the radicals and demagogues were a bigger threat internally, more so than any external threat they were looking at. And these generals wanted peace now, before things got out of hand, so all of these internal problems could just be settled by the assembly. The generals felt that the misguided talking heads in Paris had really no clue of reality out on the front, and they really didn't. We even talked about how our own Minister of War over the winter of 1791-1792 went out in the front and said, everything's fine. And these talking heads in Paris, from the general's perspective, were just looking to blame anyone else, anywhere else, for now what was obviously a misguided rush to war with the Allies. So that kind of sets the stage for this we've talked about for a long time. Going back to the Cailly and the build-up to the Estates General, how the bourgeois element and the sans-culotte element were going to start to diverge because the bourgeois electors were ignoring those complaints within the Cailly of the sans-culotte, everyday peasantry. But now there's another. We talked about another fraction. The word I'm looking for is split. We talked about another split along the way, where the civil constitution of the clergy had split the really devout Catholics from the everyday Enlightenment revolutionary, and now we're talking about a fracture where you have Paris as an entity versus the departments at large as an entity. So there's splintering going on everywhere, and then within the leadership element itself, the Legislative Assembly, and those generals actually leading the war, there is another fracture that's occurring between where they all think the real problem is. We've talked about two basic types of revolutionary in past episodes. One that thought the biggest threat to the revolution was counter-revolutionaries, these external actors, which they've kind of forced into manifestation by being warmongers. And then there were those like Lafayette who thought the largest threat to the revolution was the radicals. We're going to see tonight how the radicals, that extreme left element, both within the Jacobin Club and the Cordelier Club, those individual actors are going to become that threat tonight. And they're going to do exactly what Gilly talked about or stated when we were in chat in the beginning of the stream, and we hinted at last week. There is going to be an overthrow of the Bourbon monarchy in France by the end of the night. The émigrés are a thing. They're not exactly wrong, but the émigrés were kind of like a nice warm fire, right? It was just out there on the border. They were kind of doing their own thing and yelling about a bit, but the émigrés didn't have the backing of a major power. The Comte d'Artois and the Comte de Provence didn't have an Austrian army at their back. Brissot put an Austrian army at their back. And that's really what I mean, is there wasn't this huge real military threat until Brissot and the Girondins got up and beat the drum in the end of 1791 and through the spring of 1792. So we're going to have to start to say goodbye. We won't be saying goodbye completely tonight, but within the next few episodes, we are going to have to start to say goodbye to our very good friend, the Marquis, now General, Lafayette. We've had Lafayette as a staple of this series since the very first day, pretty much. Since episode 1.1, the Marquis de Lafayette has appeared in the credits of this show in the opening, and we have mentioned him at least once during the episode. He has led a fascinating life to this point, both as a young man who contributed to the American Revolution. Whoop! What's up? Welcome in. But we've seen him go from, young 19-year-old at the side of General Washington, working with Rochambeau in the American Revolution, coming home, becoming, kind of squeezing his way into the Assembly of Notables, and there's really good writing about that in Duncan's book, which we won't go into. I wish it had it available at the time. And then he became a member of the Society of 30 and the Society of 1789, and he really is the writer of what we would call the French Bill of Rights, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. And then we saw his fall within France at the Massacre of the Champ de Mars. The man's been on the board and the credits for every episode so far, and his end is now quickly approaching, where he's going to depart from our story for quite a while. So in the aftermath of June 20th, Lafayette saw one more, which turned out to be his last. Well, the crowds have tried to kill him, though, right? Remember, he was running around trying to stop another mob from going after another prison in Paris, and when he got there were at least 3 assassination attempts on him about a year ago in the narrative. They have tried to kill him. He's not loved at all. He was loved 2 years ago when he was astride a white horse at the first Fête de la Fédération, and he's fallen 2 years ago, and he's fallen very hard since then. But he sees this last opportunity to take center stage and potentially save his army and the nation. His primary concern was that which was espoused in that joint letter with Luckner and Rochambeau, where he felt the deluded warmongers within the Legislative Assembly were demanding far too much from a very weak and very shaky army. And after the Army of the North kind of stumbled out of the gate, and that's when Jacques-Pierre Brissot went into conspiracy warp drive. Like, he just went into crazy, Alex Jones land conspiracy theory crazy land. He just became nuts about it. America did like Lafayette a ton. We'll probably have to do kind of a supplemental episode when we get to the end of Napoleon. We talk about what happened to Lafayette between basically probably next week and when he resurfaces back into our narrative when Napoleon gets him freed from an Austrian prison. Spoiler alert. But after the Army of the North failed to fight and really made themselves surrender, Brissot goes crazy. And Lafayette starts coming around to the idea that maybe the military shouldn't be looking toward the border, but maybe the capital will have to be pacified by force. He even went so far, and this is just a little bit of treason, he even sent feelers out to the Allies to see if they wouldn't just mind holding off a little bit. Hey, I know we're scheduled for this big fight. It's on the card. We've got a promoter. There's posters up everywhere. There's going to be a war. But wouldn't you mind just wait? Would you mind just not coming to fight us just yet? Because I might just have to march back home because crazy people are taking over Paris, and I've got this army here, and we should probably go do something about that. We can come back, when I'm done taking care of that, and if there really is still a need to fight, we can fight. But if you wouldn't mind just hanging out in your tents for a little while, I might have to walk back to Paris and take care of this. He just a smidge of treason. Just a little bit. It won't be the only little bit of smidge of treason in Lafayette's life. But this is probably the first little smidge of treason. Lafayette's rationale to the Allies was that if their goal was, as it had been laid out thus far, to secure the French monarchy and royal family, right? Don't hurt them was pretty much what the Declaration of Pilnitz said. It didn't, matter that none of the other allies were there to fight with them except Prussia and Austria. But he said, hey, look, if your goal is to, secure the Bourbon family and the monarchy, it's probably in your best interest to just let me go. And once Paris is subdued, because I'm Lafayette, they still can't be mad at me, right? I mean, he did have that élan about him where he did think of himself pretty highly and maybe had a misperception of how the public thought or how the public felt about him. But once Paris is subdued, I'll come back and we can fight this war if we still need to. But it's really, you're saying you want these things. I need to go do this to ensure that this is actually your war aim. Yeah, just a sprinkle. He is looking to set himself up as a hero. Lafayette's a political idealist, though. He certainly wants to be a hero in the sense of the great epic stories. I mean, it framed his life to a degree. Remember, he didn't, for those of you who don't know, Lafayette's father died when he was like 6 or something, very young. So he had this hero marching off to war in his head, kind of mantra shaping him his entire life, and it's still there where he wants to be important. He sees himself as important, and he is important, right? He's someone who, at the first anniversary at the fall of the Bastille, stood in front of everybody in Paris. All the guard, the king, the National Assembly. He was the center man, or one of the center men that day. And we're 2 years removed from that is completely different. But he is important. He's hugely important. It's just that sentiment within France is going to change with the wind about Lafayette, as opposed to, as Dustin said, in America, where he's basically seen as a hero the entire time. You wouldn't want some dastardly murder machine to be invented that kills Louis and the Queen, would you? Yep. That's what's going to happen, though. Again, Lafayette had also signaled his displeasure with the situation in France at large and in Paris specifically to the Parisians himself when he had sent that letter that was co-signed by Luckner and Rochambeau demanding that they suppress the seditious political clubs like the Jacobin Club and the Cordelier Club. And then when Lafayette received word of what had happened on June 20th, which is just a few days after that letter was sent, he set himself up for a lost cause. A partisan mob, the Parisian mobs are behind the radicals, aren't they? Largely, yes. And that's where that wall around Paris in your mind has to be, because the radical mobs within Paris are extremely left. They've been extremely left, as far left as left will go, as we can define left to be since the Estates General. Remember, whenever the Parisian delegates rolled in, they were all pretty much on the far left of everything and just tilted things further to the left. And it's been that way, but they have just continued to push hard against whatever wall is over there in terms of what is reasonable for extreme leftist radical politics to be the entire time. But yes, they are behind the radicals. They largely have turned against Lafayette for a long time, ever since the massacre of the Champs. What's up, Archie? Welcome in, my friend. Go give Archie a follow, by the way. Watch his streams. He's playing Prey. Good friend, always here. Thank you very much for being here. So when Lafayette received word of what had happened on June 20th, with everyone breaking into the menage and breaking into the royal apartments, he decided that it was probably time to do something, because he's Lafayette. So he left the front. Probably another thing that probably could be looked at as a little bit of dereliction of duty, maybe. And he rode for Paris to hopefully take control of the situation before things got out of hand. The problem is they were already out of hand. When he arrived and appeared before the Legislative Assembly on June 28th, he discovered just how little influence he had left. He was present and demanded that the leaders of the June 20th demonstration be punished, and then repeated his call from his letter for the suppression of the Jacobins and the Cordeliers, knowing full well that he was requesting this to the face of a significant core of the Jacobins, because you remember the Girondins had kind of infiltrated the Jacobins and kind of taken them over the course of their influence. And this demand was greeted by catcalling. Not what Lafayette expected. You know, he expected he's Lafayette. And yeah, the people of Paris might not like me, but you're all reasonable gentlemen, right? You're active citizen people. You should, we're cut for the same cloth, kind of, basically. No. He was greeted by catcalling and demands to know, why are you not out there at your post? What is with this dereliction of duty? What are you doing here? Get out of here, is effectively what the assembly said. And Lafayette left the assembly pretty shaken by that. It was a severe blow to what he understood his stature to be within this, right? So he sought an audience with the royal family. And again, Lafayette grew up and went to school with Louis's younger brother, the Comte d'Artois. And he had connections to the royal family both in his young life and since coming back. Remember when the March on Versailles happened, he's the one that kind of said, look, Your Majesty, if you're going to get all those people out there to not murder you today, you have to make a couple of things happen. And one of those is move to Paris. It wasn't Lafayette's idea that the royal family moved to Paris, but that's what the royal family saw. And they rejected him on this day, on the 28th of June, 1792. This is, we don't want to talk to you, sir, because they hated him. He was the man who vehicled their move to Paris and had effectively, from their perspective, acted as their jailer, because that's that whole thing of, are they acting of their free will, or are they being held hostage by the people of Paris? And we learned after the flight to Varennes that it's really the latter, right? They're being held hostage by the people of Paris. Excuse me.
We gotta take the power back.
Take the power back. So they didn't want to talk to him. They wanted nothing more to do with Lafayette. So Lafayette, now kind of worried that the two more aristocratic entities that should be seeing eye to eye with him about what's going on right now do not want to speak with him. So he reached out then to his old comrades in the Parisian National Guard. Remember, Lafayette was their first commander, right? He designed their uniforms. He led them in that major parade on the, first feast of the Federation. He's their guy, right? He's the founder. He's Lafayette. But no, they rebuked him too. And they said, pretty much, we don't take orders from you anymore, Mr. Massacre of the Champ de Mars. Because even though he hadn't given the order to fire, he was the commander that day, and he was responsible that day, and it tarnished their reputation that day. From his viewpoint, yeah, the whole city's lost its mind. So far from being the hero he thought he was or could be again, Lafayette found out that he was little more than a disgraced pariah to every group which had really ever mattered to him outside of the Americans. Like every French group that really meant anything to him over the past 15 years had all just basically given him the finger. So, if Lafayette had really been that guy, that Jean-Paul Marat, madman French press guy, had been saying he was, like, there's Lafayette, and he's coming with a coup, and he's going to take over, because he's, he had better points in history we could have done it. But this is probably the time, right? This is probably the time where Lafayette realizes, nobody likes me, everybody hates me, guess I'll go home back to my army. This is probably the time where he could have stood those troops up and marched on Paris and really gotten that military dictatorship going that he probably wanted, or that they all thought he wanted to do. Luckner would have probably had his back, right? Rochambeau might have come back and had his back at that point. But Lafayette simply hadn't thought that far ahead. He, again, was not a cynic. He was a political idealist, and he really thought that, for the most part, working within the lanes of the system was the way to get things done, apart from, reaching out to the Austrians and saying, hey, mind waiting a minute. His troops weren't just standing around waiting for that order either. And if they were, there's no guarantee that they would have followed it either. He also probably wasn't bold enough to take this step, which would be viewed in the moment as nothing short of outright treason against his country. And regardless of what these people said this day to him, Lafayette still very much considered him a true patriot to the ideals of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and this new Constitution of 1791. He did view himself that way. So taking this step of active military action, not just to pacify Paris, but to take over, that would have been, it's way outside his scope. He would have never done that. He may have marched the army in to put down the mob, but he would never marched in to put down the government. So Lafayette goes back to the front, back to his tent, and sits down and just starts to stew about how far he had fallen. It's important to note at this point that, remember our good friend Alexandre Lamette, who was one of the triumvirate at the head of the Feuillants at the end of the National Assembly, who was also a war buddy of Lafayette. Remember, they both fought in America during the American War for Independence. Lamette's back out on the front now with Lafayette, serving with Lafayette. He's no longer in Paris. He had also had enough of what's happening, so he's a staff officer out there with Lafayette. And I only mention it because as I talk about Lafayette's additional travels as we get into the next few weeks, and I just kind of say, hey, this is where Lafayette is, Lamette's with him. After the events that we're going to talk about tonight, which comprise the insurrection of August the 10th, it will be made explicitly clear to Lafayette that staying in France probably means your death. That it's going to be hazardous to your health to stay in France once the events of tonight transpire. But we're going to fold those last revolutionary actions, at least within the French Revolution, of this man into the dominoes which fall from that day, August the 10th, and the coming weeks. And we'll see where Lafayette ends up, and we'll put him in a nice little box for a couple years, because he's going to be in a box for a couple of years. We've been going for about 52 minutes. Don't forget, exclamation point giveaway will get you a entry to get Tim Reese's book, The Black Count, which is about Alexandre Dumas' father, Charles Alexandre Dumas. That giveaway will be done at the end of, prior to, at the 2-hour mark is when it will close tonight. Entry will close 2 hours into the show, and we'll do that giveaway after the quiz tonight. Thank you all for being here. Again, did really good work in August, September for disabled American veterans. Thank you all for the gift
Remember
subs
to
and the
clonk
resubs.
that follow button.
We're going to take a break. We will be back, and we will start talking about the eve of this insurrection that we've built up to last week and then tonight. And after that, we'll actually talk about what goes down. What exactly happens. There is also a song tonight. I know that we still don't have a ton of music about the French Revolution that falls into that rock metal category, but Cracklejack, there is a song that fits into an idiom that people should have understood as things roll through. And I also get this throat problem situated because I feel like I have a frog in my throat as I'm speaking. But we're at that first hour mark roughly, so stand up, stretch your legs, get a drink, make sure you stand up please, and we'll be back in just a few minutes with part 2 of tonight's episode.
Gentlemen, we're history.
Let's rock!
Talk to the hand.
Talk to the hand. Hark, welcome in. Dustin. Luke, I'm very happy to see you here. I've never noticed your name in the lurks before, but thank you very much for showing up.
Rock! And stand!
Let's rock. Omega, welcome in, my good friend. Omega is on hiatus from streaming. It's very good to see you. We're getting we're getting an injection of charity into Omega's drive for Extra Life next week via, as you have seen tonight, Permanoob is doing his Minecraft Sky Factory 4, I think it is, where bits and subs will allow you to cause mayhem. So next week, there's a Permanoob. Well, that's a Permanoob shout out, but make sure that you go and hang out with Perm next week. It's for a great cause, and it's going to be really, really fun to see Perm with that level of interactivity in his stream that he doesn't have all that much control of. Go do your thing, Outlaws. But anyway, Whoop, good to see you as well. We will be picking up the Scare Drive pretty much the last day of Perm's thing next week. Next Friday, we will start Scare the Crap out of Fix. There's Perm's thing over there. And where you will get back at Fix Month is pretty much what it is. You'll be able to scare the crap out of me for a whole month. There will be at least 2 streams, probably 3 streams a week on top of history. I did not mention this earlier, but those streams will not be on for this. You will not be able to scare me during history. I feel it will detract immensely from the presentation of history and what its purpose is. Plus, I don't want people on YouTube having the crap scared out of them while they're trying to catch up. So it will not be on for history, but will be on for everything else. I am very excited for October. I have goals. So we just wrapped up kind of. We left Lafayette sitting out there in the front. And
Excellent!
the knowledge that keeps carrying the crap out of you. Fixtures Heavy Metal History. Ting! Yeah. So we let Lafayette is, he's out there in the front, and he's kind of stewing after he went back to Paris, and he couldn't really get anything done, and he really wasn't going to do the thing he was talking to the Allies about, like marching on Paris. I don't think he had really the backing of his troops. Remember, it's an officer-depleted army. So after the Legislative Assembly had effectively yelled at Lafayette to get back to your post, they set on working to solve the problem which Lafayette had thought he was the answer to. How to salvage this deteriorating situation.
No way!
Yes way. The demonstration of June 20th had pretty much forced everybody to take sides in a domestic squabble at the very moment that a foreign threat was looming out there on the frontier. The abuse of King Louis by the mob on June 20th had, again, been abhorrent to a lot of people, especially the leaders and non-Jacobins out in the departments, and petitions of solidarity for the king began to come in from the departments, demanding the very same thing Lafayette had just demanded, that the organizers of June 20th be punished. The governing board of the Department of Paris, which is the departmental entity that sits supposedly above the commune government, the city government of Paris, which Danton sat on at one point, took action on July 6th. And they removed Paris Mayor Pétion for his failure in containing and maybe possibly abetting that demonstration. So Pétion's fired by not the commune government, but kind of like the county government, right? The government that sits right above the city government. Even though it's an elected position, they just outright fired him. The delegates of the assembly were also pretty much in agreement with the need to punish the organizers of June 20th and with the firing of Pétion, but they were unsure what else they could do about it, given that the mob that did the whole uprising thing on June 20th literally lived on their doorstep. Who knows what the sans-culottes will do if they determine that the assembly is part of the problem? We're going to find out what they're going to do in short order, but it's part of that whole brewing diverge between the bourgeois and sans-culottes. The sans-culottes kind of have had enough. The mob is like a feral dog. Give it what it wants or it'll turn on you too. That is very true. You're going to find out how very true that is in just a little bit. But the delegates, again, the assembly largely said, yeah, we should probably stop people from thinking they can do that. But if we walk out the front door and say, stop doing that, they're probably going to shoot at us. So there was a palpable, real fear of the mob from the legislative arm of government over the summer of 1792. But if this body, the Legislative Assembly, was worried about losing control of the situation, they then made a few decisions that would absolutely ensure that they lost control of the situation. So remember that order? Last week we talked about how they had ordered 20,000 troops from the National Guard, Departmental National Guard units back into Paris, and the king saw that opportunity in that letter from Madame Roland, Jean-Marie Roland. He saw that opportunity to veto that order, where he said, no, I don't want those 20,000 guardsmen coming into Paris because the Paris guardsmen here don't want them. And the Paris guardsmen didn't want them. But the Legislative Assembly said, nah, we're going to ignore that veto. And they kind of skirted around the veto. They didn't just ignore it. Like, it's a veto. And like, okay, whatever. But they got around it. They skirted this under the auspice of the Fête de la Fédération, the anniversary of the fall of the Bastille, which was happening on June 14th yet again. And that had always kind of carried with this little open invitation to attend. All these departmental guard units can send in representatives of their guard units to march in a great parade, remember? Well, just send 20,000 of them. That's how they got around it. I think our current government has a love-hate relationship with the current mob of the United States. I think that the mob is not the same type of a mob in our current political environment. I think that there is certainly a small element that wants violent solutions to easily addressable problems, but I think their grievance is outsized. I think that the grievance that some of the people in Paris had in this time is real, especially on the food front. But there is power to be cultivated from courting the mob, the vocal minority, where, you know, those are the people that are in the headlines. Those are the ones that get your name out there and give you power. If there's always something to be said about violence, being at the head of a body capable of conducting violence leading to power. Armies are the same thing. It's how kings held power throughout most of the, second millennium AD. So there is something to that, but I don't think it's exactly the same. I think that most people today would really like to just go about their lives and say, can't we all just get along? I think that's a pretty standard thing to say. Like, well, we all have our differences, but, we have way more in common than we have, that's different. Whereas there's a very small groups, I would say, on both extreme sides of this thing, politically, modern, contemporarily speaking, where those are the ones who the internet amplifies, and those are the ones that politicians see speaking, so those are the ones that they reach out to gain a leg to stand on for their power base. Yeah, but oh look, we just happen to have 20,000 National Guard representatives this year. But because of this connection to the Fête de la Fédération, the guard companies, I'm just going to say Feast of the Federation instead of butchering French anymore. The connection to the Feast of the Federation that was a part of these guard units coming in, these guard companies who accepted and attended would play a central role in the coming insurrection of August the 10th. And history has collectively called them by a name, the Fédérés, F-E-D-E-R-E. There's some French accent thingies in there, but that's how you spell it, F-E-D-E-R-E, the Fédérés. On July 5th, the Assembly passed the now historically famous law on, quote, the country in danger, which, if invoked, would send all, and I'm going to boot stomp all, legislative and administrative bodies into permanent session, and then grant those bodies emergency powers beyond what the Constitution of 1791 technically allowed them to do. And while the assembly sowed these legal seeds that would come back to bite them, they also launched a sustained attack on the king's ministry, which was, you'll now recall, repopulated with the Feuillants after the Girondin ministry had been expunged. There are some parallels to be drawn, particularly with Brissot's warmongering and Marat's fear and violence campaign. Yes, there are certainly parallels to be drawn contemporarily to those two things. Marat is certainly what I would call an extremist of media. I don't want to label any particular source in modern times to be what we're talking about here, even though you guys generally know what I mean. But there are certainly those in media who will say, I'm just asking questions. Isn't Lafayette a traitor? What do you think? I don't know. I'm just saying. It's that kind of thing that we see today is absolutely who Jean-Paul Marat was, except he ended his statements with, oh, but if I'm right, you should murder them. Because patriots should murder those who work against the revolution. That was Marat's thing. Brissot's, I would say, is more like a majority leader of a specific entity within government, where they use this position they've been placed into to rally their bloc behind them and drive towards something they want personally for their own power base. That's more of who Brissot is. But I think you guys picking up what I'm setting down there without me disparaging anybody. But again, while the assembly was enacting and doing these things that were probably, definitely going to come back to haunt them, they launched this attack on the Feuillants ministry of the king. Since the demonstration of June 20th had failed to convince the king to ditch the Feuillants ministry and recall the Girondin ministry back to power, the assembly, coordinating with the Jacobin Club, decided to heap all manner of abuse on the recently reappointed or newly appointed Feuillants ministers. And those also recently appointed Feuillants ministers recognized immediately that they were simply pawns in a much greater game, and they all collectively resigned on July 10th. So how many times has the Ministry of France turned over in 1792? We had the Feuillants ministry, which came in at the transition to the Legislative Assembly, basically, which were fired, and then the Girondins came in, and they were fired, and now the Feuillants ministry came in, and they've resigned. So now 3 distinct apparatus of the executive have come and gone, and it's July. This was the 3rd major upheaval of the executive in 1792, and it left the king's side of the government pretty much headless as we roll into, August 1792. The next day, June 11th, a dispatch came in from the frontier indicating that the Prussian army was finally moving into attack position. And on that day, the Legislative Assembly said, uh-oh, the Prussians are doing what? The country is in danger. And they invoked that the country is in danger law. So I know about the Girondins. So remember, there was a Feuillants ministry that came in because the Feuillants at the end of the National Assembly kind of wiggled them into power, their allies. That was what was in power at the start of 1792. They were fired. The Girondin ministry came in, and they were fired. And they were replaced by a Feuillants ministry again, who just resigned. Tracking now? I hope so. There we go. So again, July 11th, the day after the Feuillants ministry resigned en masse, the Legislative Assembly gets a dispatch that says, hey, the Prussians are massing on the border. They're getting ready to come. And they said, we're in danger. And they invoked that country in danger law. They called for 50,000 new volunteers to join the army. They authorized all local guard units to be dispatched to the front. And Mayor Pétion was placed back in office to just undercut energy, which was building, to have him put back into his office from the mob. This state of emergency is the backdrop for the third feast of the Federation. If you remember, the first Feast of the Federation had been a mass rally of national unity with a parade of guard units and members of the National Assembly marching to the altar of the nation where the king had vowed to uphold constitutional principles, and Talleyrand had given that mass he really didn't know how to conduct and told Lafayette to not make him laugh. And there was Lafayette and his white horse, and there's the queen holding up the Dauphin saying, hey, we're going to teach him to live by constitutional principles, because she was scared to death. That was 3 years ago. The second one had been that subdued affair, that false summit. Remember we talked about where do we go from here? Where no one was really happy except the Society of 1789. All right, Gilly. No one was really happy with the status quo except the Society of 1789, Lafayette's group. This third Feast of the Federation was said to have been as big and as well attended as the first one, but there was something deeply menacing about the whole show. The Federated units which had accepted the invitation to attend were in some cases more radicalized than the radical sections of Paris. These guardsmen had been on the front line, battling back actual counter-revolutionary plots back home in the departments. Plots which they believed were being actively assisted by the royal family. So you have all these guard units coming in to have this Feast of the Federation. And they're rolling into the city thinking, man, we actually have been working on things back home where there's really, they're small, but there are active counter-revolutionary plots back home. And we all really feel like the king and queen are part of it. So this third feast was not about patriotic unity. It was about the potential for patriotic action. It didn't take long for formal planning of that patriotic action to get underway. Shortly after the feast happened, so real quick for Gilly, because I know he's really interested in this story. We're talking about how the third feast is primed for patriotic action, and how the guardians who rolled in to be a part of the feast had actually been fighting small counter-revolutionary things back home, and they all thought that the king and queen were a part of it. They rolled into this town armed, thinking that all the work they'd been doing back home to put down small counter-revolutionary plots were really rooted in the king and queen. So again, the third feast was not about patriotic unity, even though it was as big and as well attended as the first one, but it was about this potential for patriotic action. And you're all caught up. It didn't take long for that planning to get underway. Shortly after the feast, the Jacobin Club, you'll remember, they had long stood behind the concept of constitutional monarchy. They abandoned it. They no longer support publicly the notion of a constitutional monarchy. Robespierre has been quietly sitting there, biding his time, while Brissot and the Girondins marched the nation to war and taking control of the Jacobin Club largely. And now he flanked them from the left, and he came out in favor of just ditching the Constitution of 1791. And that's a big thing, right? Because Robespierre was a part of the National Assembly who worked for 30 months on that Constitution. He comes out and says, let's dump it. So now he's more to the left of Brissot. More to the left of Brissot puts him more as an ally of the radicals, the actual street radicals. More in alliance with the Cordelier Club, because you remember he and Danton, while they don't really like each other, kind of had a good working relationship this whole time, and it puts Robespierre politically positioned more with the Cordelier than where with the Jacobin Club stood at the time. The Girondins were now losing their grip everywhere. They had wanted to see their men reappointed to the ministry. They were not looking to see that royal ministry get abolished, which is what the Jacobin Club largely does after Robespierre leads them there quickly right after the third feast. The Girondins within the Jacobin Club were unable to stop a Jacobin petition on July 23rd, which called for an end to the monarchy. And since it was now dangerous to support the monarchy publicly, Brissot and the Girondins, they opened a secret communication line with the king to see, hey, what can we do to preserve the Constitution? And that secret correspondence is not gonna look very good at all once the Girondins get arrested and get brought before a revolutionary tribunal kind of down the road. Nor did it do much, really, to preserve the Constitution of 1791, which, as has been foreshadowed heavily, since its inception, is about to be burnt into the incinerator of history. We talked about how it wouldn't last an entire year. Well, we're here. It's going to fail at this point. Compounding the problem was the fact that the invocation of that country in danger law allowed the various assemblies of the Paris sections. Remember, there's a Paris government and the sections all have their assemblies. It allowed those sectional assemblies to sit in that permanent session, which that law guaranteed as well. And this gave the radicals an institutional base to work from, to organize that patriotic action, which the Third Feast just had oozing from it, that menace that was there. It was at this moment that our good buddy George Danton steps back into the forefront. He's been there, and we're going to cover where he's been since the massacre at the Champ de Mars, but George Danton says, "This is my moment," and he steps up to the mic. When we last left him, Georges Danton had slipped out of Paris following the massacre at the Champ de Mars, and had taken that, well-advised little vacation to England because he kind of had to beat the authorities out of the country. He was able to safely return, however, a little while later, when a general amnesty was declared at the end of the National Assembly. The National Assembly said, hey, all that stuff that happened, you're all forgiven. So on top of, and none of us are going to be here tomorrow to deal with the consequences.
Remember to clonk that follow button.
Because we can't actually be members of the Legislative Assembly. Everybody who has a past transgression against what's been going on, you're forgiven. Another one of those knucklehead moves. It stems from a tradition where when a new monarch would take over within a country, that they would issue a general amnesty. That would also come back to bite Tsar Nicholas in Russia when he granted that to, Lenin. But it stems from that tradition where government changes over, everyone is forgiven. Danton was back in time and stood for a seat in the Legislative Assembly. But with his public reputation still kind of a little tarnished from his involvement with the massacre at the Champ de Mars, he was not able to win a seat. The National Assembly is just filled with stupid ideas right before they all quit. That's very true. That last 3 months, that summer of 1791, yeah. I feel like they were probably tired, right? They made a lot of stupid decisions on their way out the door. But I have to believe fatigue and the desire to be done played a role in that, right? It's like that guy who's retiring in your office and you realize that about 6 months out from when they're retiring and it's been announced, you probably really can't count on them to do anything anymore. It's probably a little bit of that, where they're like, yeah, this Constitution's pretty much done. Can we all just wash our hands and go home now? Maybe some of them bit off a little bit more that they could chew with the tennis court oath, and they were just like, yep. And if we issue an amnesty, all these guys who are mad at us probably won't be mad at us anymore. I can just go back to my, mansion and be myself again. Because remember, we'll get to what replaces the Legislative Assembly and how many exactly of our old National Assembly buddies get into that thing. But despite the setback of not making it into the Legislative Assembly, Danton was still a highly visible figure, right? Because he's a big guy. He's been kicked in the face by, a farm animal twice. He's got this really pockmarked face. He stands out. He's the middle guy. In the picture of 9 people, he stands out as, who's that? He stands out just because he is who he is. He's also a very gifted orator. He was visible in the streets, but also within the Jacobins. He still went there. He was still a member, obviously. And as Brissot and the Girondins drove Paris to war, Danton actually sided with Robespierre. You mean Danton and Robespierre working together? And he opposed the war. Remember how he said it took a crazy person to stand in front of that momentum, and Robespierre was a special kind of crazy? Danton was too. Danton was publicly opposed to the war and stood right next to Robespierre. And these two guys are both revolutionary giants, right? You can't question their revolutionary credentials to this point to put them in front of a mob to be, killed or anything. They really were leaders from a radical left perspective. They just looked at the war from the same perspective and said, why are we going to go fight there? We still have problems to solve here. That was really their stance. So Danton had looked on approvingly as those sugar shortages we talked about last week kind of stirred the pot in Paris again and got the people all riled up because they couldn't make their coffee sweet enough. But he opposed the demonstration of June 20th. He was not a leader of it because he saw it as a counterproductive exercise which would only generate sympathy for Louis, which it did, because now we are sitting here looking out at departmental petitions coming in saying, what just happened? We stand with the king. So he was right. He saw that. He saw that correctly. Not within just Paris. He saw it from a French perspective. He was correct. So after June 20th, Danton decided it's time to do something. It's time to do something very productive. And he began to actively plan to overthrow the French monarchy. So from his base in the Cordeliers, which we're still going to call it that, even though it's an amalgamation of two sections. From his base in the Cordeliers section, Danton made his rounds to all the different Paris section assemblies and urged them to start ignoring the active-passive citizenship distinction. He stated that everybody should be able to attend all the proceedings of all the assemblies. Yeah, it's time. And the poorer assemblies, the poorer sections, wasted no time saying, you're right. And all of those sectional assembly meetings were soon just teeming with sans-culottes. None of them happy, all ready to do something about it. On July 27th, Danton organized what is called the Coordination Committee, which would start to hold regular meetings in the Hotel de Ville to coordinate the activity of the Paris sections, the Federate Guard companies, and allied political clubs, including the Jacobins, who were represented on this coordination committee by none other than Robespierre. It's very, very difficult to say that these two weren't working together for much longer than it appears, but they are certainly working together now. Many of the more well-to-do sections of Paris refused to send representatives to Danton's coordinating committee. What date was that? July 27th, 1792. But many of the more affluent sections of Paris, when called to send representatives to be on this coordinating committee that we're secretly doing something that's not so much a secret, they didn't send anybody. So the only people who sat on this coordinating committee were really radical. There was no voice of moderation or voice of doubt on this committee. The people who were there wanted to be there. They wanted to do something. So what this committee was coordinating was, a closely held secret. No one really talked about what they were up to outside of the doors, but it really wasn't all that hard to guess either, for anybody that was aware of it, kind of what they were up to. So on July 28th, the next day, the day after the coordination committee was formed, a bomb drops that seals the fate of the French monarchy. From his headquarters, just beyond the frontier, the Allied overall commander, so think of him as the coordinated commander of both armies, the Duke of Brunswick, Charles Ferdinand, issued what is now the infamous Brunswick Manifesto, which openly declared the war aims of Austria and Prussia. 1. End the anarchy in France. Stop the attacks. 2. Stop the attacks on the king and the Catholic Church. 3. Reestablish the king and all of his sovereign authority. 4. If anyone decided to harm a hair on the king's head, the violence, this is quote, the violence delivered onto the people of Paris would be exemplary, end quote. So clearly, Prussia and Austria have learned nothing from the previous hardline talk, because all that these threats did was galvanize the French into mass resistance and led to the overthrow of the monarchy that the Allies were trying to protect. After the manifesto lands in Paris on July 28th, things move really quickly. On July 30th, the Legislative Assembly passed an order that passive citizens would now be again allowed to join the National Guard, and that all patriotic citizens should do so right now. The same day, July 28th, and this is one of those, how did that thing get to be this thing I know today? A 500-man company of guardsmen arrived from Marseille, which is southeast France. The men of this group turned out to be a particularly eager cohort of guardsmen. Their home city down on the Mediterranean coast had become a sort of regional hub for patriotic revolutionaries. Its citizens had kind of self-appointed themselves as defender of the revolution in the southeast. Marseille had sent units to assist with that annexation of Avignon and the Comte de Venaissin, which you talked about 2 episodes ago. Marseille had identified the nearby city of Arles as the hub of counter-revolutionary activity, and had sent a 6,000-man expeditionary force to lay siege to their own French citizens in a different city and expel its leaders. So the 500 men from Marseille who arrived in Paris were absolutely ready to take this fight to the next step when they came into the capital, and they were singing a new patriotic anthem, which had been written by an army officer stationed on the Rhine just a few months earlier. The song had spread, and when the company arrived, they came in singing it proudly. This is how the song ends up being called Le Marseillaise, which is now the French national anthem today. The chorus, which is still unchanged, reads as follows, quote, "To arms, citizens, form your battalions. Let's march, let impure blood water our furrows." End quote. That is still in the words of the French national anthem today. It's a little scary. It's about nationalistic purity. It's a little scary. But now you know where La Marseillaise comes from. That's where the French national anthem comes from. July 28th, 1792. These 500 crazy guys, Marseille National Guard unit, walk into Paris singing it. So when ultra-patriot Federé units like this one from Marseille arrive...
No way!
Yes, way, that's where it comes from. When ultra-patriot Federé units like the ones from Marseille arrive in Paris, all throughout July, they pointedly did not put themselves at the disposal of the Paris Commune government, which means they didn't walk in and say, hey, we're here. If anything crazy happens, feel free to issue us orders. They did not do that. What they did instead was found Danton's coordinating committee and said, hey, if you need guns, we're your guys. Most of those 20,000 Federé units, which the Legislative Assembly said, hey, come on in to be part of a parade, walked right in and didn't say, we're here to support the Constitution or we're here to support the Paris government. We're here because, hey, look, Georges Danton wants to do something, and we're basically at his beck and call when the day comes. So now, with an actual army at its command, the coordinating committee began to wield actual practical power, more than the official Paris Commune government actually did. It was not long before the power of the coordinating committee started to rival that of the actual Legislative Assembly, which had been backed into a corner to defend the Constitution of 1791, and they were quickly losing support after the public calls for the end of the monarchy from the Jacobins within the radical sections. So on August 3rd, Mayor Pétion presented a petition to the Assembly demanding the overthrow of the monarchy, and the Legislative Assembly said, no, we're not going to consider that. The coordinating committee was announced on one day. I think it's important to understand that the groundwork for the coordinating committee was announced at the end of Danton's reemergence following June. I think you can draw a line from June 20th to July 28th, where Danton says, okay, that didn't go well. These guys don't know what they're doing. It's time to actually do something. The planning starts to happen where Danton goes out to the sectional assemblies and says, hey, start ignoring that whole active passive citizenship thing. And they say, most of them say, okie dokie. And then all the crazy sans-culottes start attending, and they start getting riled up. It's fomenting that radical grievance base for Danton. And along the way, he's laying the groundwork with, he's not just, sitting there waiting for Guardians to come in. He's obviously corresponding with them. He's conspiring with them. There's a conspiracy going on with the more radical elements of the Jacobin Club. There's obviously a connection between him and Robespierre, right? But then the day that they say, hey, this coordination committee exists as a thing now, we're going to meet for the first time at the Hotel de Ville. It wasn't like they just decided to do it that day. It was planned. And then the next day, this Marseille company walks in. It's a good example, but you have to think of it as almost a 6-week thing. Yeah, it's less spontaneous than you would initially take it, but it's 6 weeks, right? 6 weeks later, and Danton has an army of 20,000. That's pretty quick. It goes to speak to how good of an organizer the guy was. It also helps the fact that he had Robespierre pretty much sitting there as a parallel. Danton was the commoner sans-culotte guy, and there's Robespierre, who still has his hands into the more radical-minded bourgeois, and they kind of form a wonder twin group for a minute. They don't like each other. They respect each other, but they don't really get along. They're not hanging out, grabbing a beer together or anything. One, because Robespierre drinks milk, but they weren't buddy-buddy, but they saw the opportunity presented by working together. And so that 6-week interval is when all this goes down. Hopefully that clears it up a little bit. Yeah, and so Lafayette comes into town at the same time as all this is being planned and goes to all of the public-facing entities and says, hey, you should do something. I said, get out of here. Hey, you should do something, royal family. I said, we don't want to talk to you. Hey, National Guard, you should do something. And part of the National Guard was like, wait, hold on. We're on the phone with George Danton right now. We'll get back to you. Yeah, that's a pretty good statement. Lafayette arrives with this back, and after all that's done, he's back at the front saying, none of that worked out. He doesn't know any of this is coming. We're going to get into what he does after he finds out what happens next week. So again, on August the 3rd, so we're 7 days away from this thing now, Mayor Pétion presented this petition to the Assembly demanding that the monarchy be overthrown, and the Legislative Assembly says, we're not even going to talk about that, but because they're in this corner. Their entire legitimacy as a legislative body is rooted in the existence of the Constitution of 1791. So, of course, now they have to defend it. Imagine, just for a moment, if they had defended it from the outset. We always talked about how this group that came in had no interest in defending this document that was written by their predecessors, of which none comprised the now Legislative Assembly. And now we're almost a year removed, and like, whoa, this document's really important because without it, we don't exist. We have no power. We aren't a thing. So they have to defend it. Brissot and the Girondins spend the first week of August giving speech after speech opposing any more violent moves on the king. Remember, they're sending secret letters at the same time. They were, of course, not one mind on this, and a few of the members of the Legislative Assembly, and especially within the Girondins, could see the writing on the wall for the Constitution of 1791. They kind of like, yeah, this is not going to last. And we're afraid that if they did not back the Paris sections, they would be swept out right along with the monarchy which none of them really loved anyway, right? Because they were sitting there the whole last year going, why does the king get to veto stuff? Who wrote that dumb rule, right? They don't love the king, but here they are defending the very instrument that keeps the king in power. There are certainly members of the assembly who can see that writing on the wall and go, yeah, probably time to not be on the wrong side. Or they were either saying get out of Paris, or they were saying it's probably time to come out publicly in favor of the dissolution of this body and the Constitution, right? Because that would put them squarely on the side of the coordinating committee. But as a whole, the Legislative Assembly as a body had chosen to oppose whatever Danton and the coordinating committee were effectively trying to force them to do. They didn't know for sure. You could kind of infer what they were up to based on the events of the last few weeks. But they basically said, hey, what you're doing, whatever it is, no. So there it is. The Legislative Assembly says, no, we're not in favor of whatever it is the George Danton and Robespierre, who's going to those meetings, are up to. The delegates came under pressure to impeach Lafayette, and they debated that case on August the 8th and then refused to do so. Impeach meaning remove him from being in charge of his army. So, at this point, Danton and the committee, in light of the fact that the Legislative Assembly stood in opposition to them, just pretty much concluded that the Assembly was beyond hope, and they met in an all-night session, at the conclusion of which they declared themselves to be the Insurrectionary Commune. And then, just before dawn, on August the 10th, 1792, they set about seizing control of Paris. We're going to get to that in the next section, but what I want to do is bring one song to the fore. I have emphasized the words writing on the wall twice, because there's a great song about it that just came out by Iron Maiden. The origin of the idiom writing on the wall comes from the book of Daniel in the Bible, where after the temple was sacked by Belshazzar, there is supposedly this mysterious hand that writes on the wall, and Daniel's brought in to uncover what the meaning of it is, and Daniel reminds... Whoa, thank you for the follow, MTU Jarov. Welcome in. But Daniel tells Belshazzar to not forget what happened to his father Nebuchadnezzar when Nebuchadnezzar became arrogant, and he was thrown down, Nebuchadnezzar was, until he learned that God had sovereign authority over the king of men, and Belshazzar had likewise blasphemed God, and so God had then sent this mysterious hand. Daniel reads the message and interprets it. God has numbered Belshazzar's days. So that's where the expression writing on the idiom writing on the wall comes from. And as I just said, there were members of the Legislative Assembly who could see that writing on the wall for the Constitution of 1791. So we're going to squeeze in a song, because we haven't had one for a while, as a part of heavy metal history. And then when we get done with the song, we will take our break, we will come back, and we will get into the insurrection of August the 10th. So it's coming at you right about now. Enjoy. I'll say hi, and then we will go to a break right after. And we should be taking that pretty. They set out to start seizing control of Paris. First thing that happened on the day of August the 10th was the original commune government of Paris, the city government of Paris, was expelled from the Hotel de Ville. So if you can't see it, we're going to zoom in on it over here. And let me bring that a little bit more into the view. So let's focus in on this map now. They expel the existing government. When I say expel, I mean most of the members of the Paris Commune government could see that writing on the wall. Gonna keep using that idiom. And they just didn't show up for work that day. Then, the insurrectionary commune, who already controlled most of the Federate companies who had come into town, outright declared themselves in control of the Parisian National Guard. Nope, They didn't kill him. And most of the guard companies, the Parisian guard companies, accepted this willingly. Most of them. Not all of them. Once the tocsin bells started sounding, and that word tocsin bells gets said a lot in history podcasts and in history documentation, but it's not spelled how you think it's spelled. It's not Toxin, it's Tocsin. And it doesn't mean toxin as in there's a plague or pandemic or like gas or anything like that. The tocsin bells are emergency bells, right? They are rung so that people out in the countryside know something is wrong and should come to the city to help. But the tocsin bells, remember the Day of the Tiles? The tocsin bells rang that day too. The beacons are lit! Yeah. When the tocsin bells started ringing, it was pretty much the signal for the beginning of the insurrection for everyone who knew about it. The commander of the Parisian Guard Company, so we're going to zoom back out here, who is a man named, get over here, Antoine Galliot Mondant. Is this gentleman over here, upper right, Mondant. So as the tocsin bells are sounding, the commander, Mondant, actively worked to block all the bridges across the River Seine to keep the mobs from the two sides of the city from linking up. And then he went to the Tweelery Palace, which has the black marker on the map. So now we'll zoom back in here because you know what Mondant looks like. And I always have to click here. There we go. Oh, geez. I didn't mean to do that. There we go. We'll bring this map up into full view for you guys. He then went to the Tweelery Palace to assist with fortifications that were rapidly being erected to defend the palace. So it's one of those things like everyone kind of knew what was coming. They knew what the coordinating committee were up to. So when the bell sounded, everyone knew it was like, oh, today is the day, you know. When Danton found out, because Danton's now effectively in charge of the insurrectionary commune, which is now declaring themselves in charge of Paris and in command of all the guard, when Danton found out that Mondant was working against the insurrectionary commune, he issues an order for Mondant to appear before them at once and explain what he's doing. And Mondant obviously resisted this order for a few hours, but then he kind of contemplated what was going down, and he decided he would go, and that he might reason with them and forestall the armed confrontation that was about to take place. But when he arrived, Mondant was hauled in front of Danton, who dressed him down and yelled at him and etc. for, insubordination, because Danton firmly believed, I'm in control now, I'm in charge. And then ordered the now ex-commander of the Parisian National Guard thrown in prison. But unfortunately for Mondant, he would never make it to prison. As soon as he was outside of the Hotel de Ville, one of his more patriotic escorts decided to shoot him in the head with a pistol. So there's Antoine Galliot Mondant. Gets to come up on our board for exactly 2 minutes to get shot in the head.
No
Yes way. What? Yep. If you think that's nuts, wait till next week. Yeah, they walked him outside with express orders to take Mondant off to prison, and one of his escorts said, nah, boom, and killed him. Gun to the head, dead. This is...
Yes, I'm excited about this.
Not like that, or like that. That's coming very, very soon, though. Yeah, vive la France. Back at the Tweelery Palace... Yeah, not the first time we've seen Parisian street justice either. Remember the intendant of Paris was lynched along with his son-in-law for trying to get out of town way back in 1789, right after the fall of Bastille? It's not the first example of street justice. Next week might as well just be called street justice. But we're going to get into what that's called at the end of the show tonight. But back at the Tweelery Palace, the royal family obviously waited around nervously for the hammer to fall. The palace grounds were defended by about 200 National Guard, who had resisted the insurrectionary commune's order, and a couple of hundred random courtiers who had come in from that old sword nobility caste, a few dozen army officers who were still loyal to the crown, and about 900 Swiss Guard mercenaries. King Louis XVI very briefly flirted with the idea of personally leading the defense of the palace. Well, he'd have died that day instead of when he actually dies. But he was talked down for what was a really bad idea and advised that the family should seek formal asylum within the walls of the Legislative Assembly, within the Menage. The Assembly had actually gathered in a very nervous and tense session with the few hundred delegates who were really willing to make some kind of public demonstration that they were still, in fact, a thing, a body that mattered. So about 9 a.m., the royal family crossed the courtyard from the palace grounds proper into the Menage, which is still in the facility, and were placed into a small room. These steps that they took that day, walking from their chambers over to the Menage, would be the last free steps they ever took. The last willfully free action that the king and queen ever take is walking across the the Legislative Assembly and saying, "Please protect us." At about 11 a.m., the forces of the insurrectionary commune had cleared the bridges that Danton and his group had blocked, gathered together in one great mass, and arrived at the gates of the palace. They were at least 20,000 strong, and at their head were no longer scruffy artisans or angry fishwives, but trained soldiers. And at the head of those soldiers were that particularly eager company of guardsmen from Marseille. What happens next goes down quickly and is very confused from a historical perspective, as most battles are. But we do know this. The National Guard that was present defending the palace looked out, and they defected immediately. They said, we're on their side now. It seems that there was a back and forth that gave the crowd the impression that the remaining Swiss Guard and courtiers were going to just stand down and let them in. So when the gates opened, it came as a shock to the crowd that the Swiss Guard opened fire on them, reminding them all of the mob at the fall of the Bastille when that mob rushed into that first courtyard and the guards fired on them. Now remember, the gates to the Bastille were actually opened by members of the mob who had climbed in over the walls, but it didn't matter. It reminded them exactly of that. Why the Swiss fired, whether it be by accident or design, is a mystery. There's no way we're ever going to know. There's no documentation of an order. But the reaction of the mob is not a mystery. They started shooting back. And this firefight just engulfs the palace. From his hiding spot within the Menage, within the Legislative Assembly, the king tries to issue orders to the Swiss to stand down, but there was no way that order was ever going to reach them. Eventually outnumbered, the Swiss Guard were forced to fall back, and when they did, the mob simply overwhelmed them. No quarter was offered. They were swept over by an angry mob of sans-culottes bearing knives, daggers, and pikes, which they used to hack the guards to death. It took hours to track down and kill the last few stragglers of the Swiss Guard who had gone into hiding in the palace, and in total, about 600 of them were killed, alongside about 300 from the mob who lay dead beside them. Inside the assembly, the delegates who had remained at their posts did what they could to placate the mob now at their door. They voted immediately to suspend the king. They declared elections would be held immediately for a new national convention which would replace them as a body. The task of that convention would be to draw up a new constitution for France, as obviously the Constitution of 1791 is dead as a doornail now. Elections, and this is critical, elections to the National Convention would be held on the basis of universal manhood suffrage, eschewing the active-passive distinction which had to this point determined eligibility to vote. So that means anybody can potentially get in to this new National Convention. One of the people who will get in is none other than our old friend Jean-Paul Marat, who will actually be elected as a delegate to the National Convention. Thomas Paine. You know Tom Paine? Wrote Common Sense, foundational document of American liberty. He gets elected because he had been living in London and had recently come to France. Tom Paine gets elected as a delegate to the National Convention as well. The royal family was then transferred to the Temple. The Temple was an old Knights Templar stronghold on the edge of the city, and they would remain there until the National Convention was elected and then decided what to do with them. It's not going to be good. The Legislative Assembly then pressed on through the day as best they could. The king was suspended technically, but the royal ministry still existed technically, so they voted to reappoint the ousted Girondins to their previous posts in an effort to obviously placate the mob. However, this ministry, this newly reappointed Girondin ministry, would have one new member. Time has run out on the giveaway, by the way. If you're not in, you're not getting in. A timer is likely to play again, so let me go back and turn that timer off now. Turn that one off. So, as the Legislative Assembly, in its waning moments, was trying to sort out how to survive, they reappointed the Girondin ministry. Basically, the Fouillants were gone anyway, right? They had resigned. So they reappointed the Girondins, and they critically add one new member. Georges Danton received more votes than anyone from within the Legislative Assembly, and by nearly unanimous acclamation of the members who were present, Georges Danton is named Minister of Justice for the nation of France. So after the smoke clears from August 10th, it became very clear that neither the lame duck Legislative Assembly nor the reappointed Girondin ministry held any real power. That power instead lay with the insurrectionary commune, which had just overthrown the national government and had seized control of not just Paris, which was their aim, but all of France. It's worth noting that of all the accidental events thus far, which have tumbled us further and further down this crazy road, such as the formation of the National Assembly, the Tennis Court Oath, the fall of the Bastille, the March on Versailles, the Flight to Varennes, the Massacre of the Champ de Mars, all of those were kind of accidental things that happened, right? Dustin wins! Yay! Thank you for pulling that, Gilly. Dustin wins the book. Awesome. Dustin, get with me in DM if you want that by Audible credit, if you want the physical copy, or if you want a Kindle copy. Right, as I have to go. Sweet. Glad you got the win on your way out the door. We'll get that sorted out to Dustin shortly. But it's worth noting that after all this, the Tennis Court Oath, the National Assembly being formed, the fall of the Bastille, the March on Versailles, the Flight to Varennes, the Massacre of the Champ de Mars, these are all kind of things that were tripped into, right? Just kind of like the American Revolution was tripped into. It was like, I guess so. I guess we kind of bumble-stumbled here to this point. All those things were never pre-planned. The insurrection of August the 10th was pre-planned. It is a true revolution. Hey, look, a bot guy just rolled in. Thank you very much for the follow, but you're a part of that whole bot complex that can't do anything for me, so you're probably blocked already. Haas00 is explicitly banned by my bot because it's a root for all hate bots. Have a nice one. Oh yeah, well, I'll draw it in the future. It's not a big deal, but it is cool that Dustin found out before he left. Actually have a button to do it. No big deal. But the point here is that this thing that happened, yeah, it's because the script mentions that Moz can pull it because it's Apple's script. But this thing that happened, the August the 10th insurrection, was a planned thing. It was a planned thing that achieved its ends, right? It was a planned revolution, because it really is a revolution. It's
Remember to clonk that follow
It's
button.
upheaval against the existing established government and replacing it with something else. And they accomplished that goal. Down the road, when Lenin and the Bolsheviks are planning their thing, and even in the mid-19th century, revolutionaries, as they begin to become a political machine, are not going to look to 1789 as how to do things. They're going to look to this day. How Georges Danton got all of this done successfully as the prototype embryonic, this is how you do it, true revolution, because it was a true revolution. So next week, we'll continue to deal with the fallout from the insurrection of August the 10th and an insurrectionary commune, which was really done coddling the enemies of France. What defines an enemy of France? Ask the insurrectionary commune. The Allied army will finally cross the frontier and begin what looks like to both sides a steady and unstoppable march to Paris, which will lead to a reaction inside Paris, which makes Brissot's paranoid theories seem downright conservative. And now that the mobs were running Paris, words alone would be insufficient in the face of internal and external enemies, which is how we will arrive at the shocking brutality of what is known as the September Massacres. We talked about earlier in chat, Mob Street Justice, Mass Kangaroo Court Street Justice, and you will be shocked by how this all goes down. But the enemies of France are about to literally have their blood running down the cracks of the streets of Paris. But we'll get to that next week. Thank you all for hanging out tonight, paying attention, listening to music, and all your generosity. We're going to get to a quiz. Again, I'll restate, Rocket's not here. She's way ahead. Play your cards right, and you may be able to make a dent in that lead, as I have made sure that there are more questions than usual tonight. I actually toyed with the idea of like a 30-question part 1 recap quiz to give you guys a real shot, but that wouldn't have been fair to her. But there are a few more questions than usual. So let's get over to a quiz. Actually, we're going to take care of this real quick just to make sure, because they didn't speak, and it's an on-speak. So we're going to make sure, because I can recognize a hate bot when I see one. Bye-bye. All right. So, let me get my quiz questions up. They are no longer in order of presentation because Gilly was cheating. Here's your first question. Here we go. Question 1. Roughly how many people died in total during the assault on the Tweelery Palace? 900. Gilly's right on top of that one. He's like, this is my moment. I can cut 14 points off this lead. The second question, here we go. What was the big issue the French living in the departments had with the demonstration of June 20th? Uprising against the king. Yeah, kind of. It'll be a little bit more detailed than that. You're on the right track. Sturf's got the other half of it, kinda. You guys are like 2/3 of the answers now. This mob that came out on June 20th comprised... Nope, that's not it either. They actually wanted the leaders punished, but... There was no lynching on June 20th, so that's not the answer. So, support of the monarchy is true. They didn't like the uprising against the king. That's true. There's a little element in here that you guys are not capturing, though, that is important to it. That here we are, this big, broad nation of France, and here they are, one city in France, and this section of the people of that city. There we go. That's the piece that was missing. It's all about Paris. They didn't like the fact that there was an outsized influence from the Parisians, period, right? But they really didn't like the fact that that outsized influence wasn't in traditional channels. Traditional in terms of following the government, petitioning the government. They were actually actively beating down doors violently. Yeah, General Dillon was not the 20th. That was before it. We're talking about what actually happened at the Tweelery Palace and the Menage on the 20th. So Gilly gets that one. Gilly now at 42. Question number 3 coming your way. What was the last free action taken by the royal family? Walked seeking asylum. That is the accurate answer. Menage as one word is meaningless to me, Gilly. If I was a teacher in school, I'd be like, what's that mean, right? Walked across to the Menage seeking asylum is the correct answer, and Sturfers will get that one. I know you're trying to do it quickly, but don't be like Rocket was in the early days. Don't even say Nicki Minaj in here again. Ban that word. Sturfers. I don't like idiots. Let's not give idiots a bigger soapbox to stand on, right? All right. The next question coming your way. What did the leading generals of the French armies feel was the biggest threat to France in the summer of 1792? The internal threats of the Paris insurrection. Be more specific. What were those threats? Nope. Not the insurrection. There are elements. What elements representing the insurrection, or not really the insurrection, but what elements that were actively working with inside Paris were they seeing as the problem? Nope. Well, Brissot is one side of it, so that's half the answer. Demagogues taking opportunity. Brissot's half was the other half. That's still the same idea. Radicals, the assembly calling for war in Brissot. Those rumors that Rochambeau and Lafayette and Lucknow were about to tell their soldiers surrendered. Nope. That was not what the generals... Those are the generals. Nope. Gilly's got half of it. There were demagogues that were using the situation as an opportunity to power. So now think outside the assembly. That comprises the problem within the assembly, the demagogues. Now what outside the assembly was problematic? Lafayette explicitly wrote a letter and then appeared in front of the assembly asking for something to be done. He did it twice. So, punishing the insurrectionists of June 20th aside, what was the other thing Lafayette was asking for? There it is. Demands that the insurrectionist Jacobins and Cour d'Allier be disbanded. It's the demagogues and the social political clubs. Those were the two things that they thought were the biggest problem. Servers never hit either one of those points. Gilly hit both of them, which is the answer, so Gilly will get it. Degogs and radicals were more of an issue. General wanted peace now. That's true. Alrighty. Here we go with question number whatever we're on. Full name here, please, for the answer. What is the name of the National Guard commander that tried to block the bridges of Paris to prevent mobs from linking up on August the 10th? You really enjoy the quiz part, Pi? Thanks for being here. Antoine Gallio Mondant, because it was copied directly from his notes, but that is correct. Mondant, who was then shot in the street by one of his escorts after Danton ordered him to go to prison. The next question. Good to see you, Pi. Next question is this. What action, which might be considered light treason, did Lafayette take in the early days of the war to potentially forestall an Allied invasion? Contacting the Allies to forestall the war. You both got it, but Gilly was first. Gilly now on 45 points. The next question. I wonder if there shouldn't be a period of acceptable answers instead of just one. Well, that is the only acceptable answer. He wrote to the Allies trying to forestall the wars, but then copy-paste is a problem. Gilly used bigger words. Yeah, you got it. This is the first person to get the essence of the answer. And as I've said since the first show, I'm the judge of the essence of the answer because, you know, I wrote the questions and I'm referring to those questions from my notes. So it will always be what I believe to be, and I believe I've been fair thus far about who gets the essence of the answer. Question. To whom did ultra-patriot Federated companies pledge their loyalty when they arrived in Paris of the summer of 1792? Not Danton directly. That is not the right answer. Doc, welcome in. Good to see you, my friend. Danton was a member of it. There it is, the Coordination Committee. That is the correct answer. The Coordination Committee is the correct answer. They came in and pledged themselves to the Coordination Committee. Gilly now at 46. The next question coming your way. Once I fix a typo again. There we go. Next question coming your way. Here it comes now. What action did the Paris Departmental government take in the aftermath of the demonstration of June 20th? Wow. No one's a bam with an answer. No one's just boom, I got that one on my notes. Mayor Pétion. Mayor Pétion was fired. That is correct. Mayor Pétion was fired by the departmental government of France, Paris, which is that kind of county level government that sits above the city level commune government. Gilly again gets the answer now at 47. This one should be really easy, but requires a long and wordy answer. Hint, hint, will not take a two-word answer for this one. Where does the French national anthem come from? That one place. Nope. The Marseillaise, the song the Marseille Guard was singing as they entered Paris. That is good enough. They entered Paris on July 28th, 1792, singing the song which was written by a soldier out on the Rhine and caught fire, popular, sings about national purity and bloodletting, but never mind all that. It's still the national anthem of Paris. It's called Les Marseillaises now because it is that guard company of 500 from Marseille that marched in that day singing it. Gilly gets the correct answer. The next question coming your way. Once I copy it from the clipboard and get it over to chat, here we go. Now, what factor paralyzed the Legislative Assembly from taking any real action against the organizers of the June 20th demonstration? Fear of going against the mobs. Correct. The Legislative Assembly, while they would defend the Constitution of 1791 and everything else throughout the summer, they really were hamstrung. Just had their shoelaces tied by the idea that if we do something that's really unpopular, they're just going to come for us. And guess what? They did, in a sense, come for them. And what did they do? Said, oh, we quit. We'll give you a new body to work with. Just don't kill us. That's pretty much what happened at the end of August 10th. But Gilly gets the correct answer again. Gilly at 49. And we know what they do to people they don't like. Let me rephrase this question more accurately. Notice the wording of this, please. What were the names of the body which planned the insurrection led by Danton? Names meaning it had two names. The Insurrection of Commune. That's close to one of the names. Names is meaning more than one. Well, if no one else gets an answer with both, Sturf will get it just by default. She's the only person that answered, and she's half right. Give it 10 more seconds. Insurrection Committee, nope. We're one word short of the other one, though. All right, time's up. So it was originally called the Coordinating Committee, remember? But on the day that things went down, they renamed themselves to the Insurrectionary Commune, which Sturf was the closest to. So this body had two names in a span of, 7 weeks. Coordinating Committee was the first name. Insurrectionary Commune, which is now the Insurrectionary Commune Government, that was the other name. So Sturf will get that one by virtue of the fact that she got half of it. We have 1, 2, 3 questions left. How did the Legislative Assembly skirt the King's veto of the order to call up 20,000 Departmental Guardsmen to Paris, which ended up being their doom? Going to the third Fête de la Fédération, they asked representatives for parade. Yeah, they're both right in the sense of what's going on. So what they did was the Feast of the Federation always had an open invitation for Guardians to come in and participate in the parade. And so yes way, it always did. And so they used that standing invitation for those Guardians to come in. So as I explained it, I feel like Gilly's first answer is in the essence of the answer, so we'll give it to him because he was ahead of Sturf. They're both right, but Gilly got it in first. 2 questions left. The invocation of the Country in Danger law allowed what critical thing to occur within Paris which added fuel to the engine of the insurrection? Permanent meetings of departments and committees. Be more specific, please. You're on the very right track, though. That means the Paris Commune government, There it is. It allowed the sectional assemblies to sit in permanent session, giving the radicals an institutional base to work from, which is exactly how I said it. What do you have, like dragon speaking and opening your computer to take your notes now? That's exactly what it said in my notes. Like, word for word how I wrote it. Gilly is correct. Gilly now at 51. The very last question. The very last question, here we go. What key policy reversal did the Jacobins execute around the 3rd anniversary of the Fête de la Fédération? They had long been a supporter of something, and then were no... Yep. The concept of constitutional monarchy. Correct. The Jacobins had long been a supporter, maybe not all of them, but in terms of their public policy, been a supporter of constitutional monarchy, and they no longer were. And you can obviously see that as one of those tumblers, one of those gears in the machine of the coordinating committee, that the Jacobins were now falling in line behind it. Sorry, Sturf. Assuming Ari's feeling better, you'll still get your shot next week. Got it. Gilly. Gilly, 52. Now, only 24 behind Rocket. And a huge lead on Surf now. Over double Surf's point total. Don't be... Could have played some cards along with Gilly. Thrown the bonus card down and, you know, gotten a ton of points. No one played any cards. That's a missed opportunity. But it is what it is. So that will bring us back over here.
Let's rock!
Let's us see who may be out there in a stream somewhere near us to host this evening. Lots of people streaming. Hey, you're using the exact same theme I am. Never stream, never comes to us. Anybody have a suggestion? I've got a couple people, but you know what? This individual came in to us and hung out with us yesterday during Destiny, so we're going to go say hi to them. Most of you know Slackadelic. I do hope Ari feels better soon. Fletch, I hope Junior feels better soon as well. I was glad to read that you did get some sort of diagnosis and resolution there, but it is good to hear that as well. Again, thank you all for being here, for being interested. Hopefully you found tonight to be eye-opening, and if you think this was shocking, yeah, the next couple episodes are really going to get you, because it gets bloody. Bloody. But thank you, as always, for being here. Dustin, I will get with him about the book. Congratulations. We will make a selection. If you have a suggestion about a topically relevant book for the giveaway, please drop that in Fixer Industries channel in Discord. Otherwise, I will start to consider what book we are giving away in the next few days. It will be relevant to the French Revolution or France, you know, revolutionary Napoleonic Bourbon Restoration period. But outside of that, as always, just appreciate the feedback. We will be back probably on Monday with more Destiny as I continue to try to set myself on schedule for the Scare Drive in October. And if you're not familiar with that, you should have seen a banner popping in all night long. Multiple streams per week in October. You will be given the opportunity to scare the crap out of me for $10. Where all that will go is to Stop Soldier Suicide, which is aiming to lower the suicide rate of veterans and active duty service members by 40% by the year 2030. Noble cause. We get $1,000 raised in October. I get a tattoo. $50 gets you 70 packs of Streamloots cards to mess with me during Destiny on. And then, of course, we'll have Heavy Metal History every Saturday, which will not include the streams, but will include the donations. They will still be available for you to donate. They just won't pop an alert. You can still passively see it in the bar. And all that's coming to you starting next Friday. So Monday afternoon, Destiny. And then we'll be back here for sure next Saturday night for episode 1.17. We talk about the September Massacres of 1792 and how it all starts to go off the rails. We're getting really close to the guillotine and the Great Terror, everybody. I know everyone was like, where's the guillotine? But it's coming very, very, very soon. Have a good night. As always, thank you all for being here. And I will talk to you all later. But let's go through our outro. Dustin, Monday through Saturday. Maybe not Saturday is much longer. 7:30 to 10:30 a.m. Make sure you're hanging out with him in the mornings for your commuter when you sit down at your desk. And after him, he's going to be permanent, especially be there next week for his Minecraft Lets Us Blow Up Things in the Sky Factory 4 with donations and bits benefiting Extra Life at 10 a.m. Gilius, weeknights, 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Intent Rocket is on vacation. I'm not sure. I think he's back Sunday. But the afternoons on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then Saturdays right after Dustin.
The excellent.
And then our good friend Omega raising money for Extra Life coming up at you next. Actually, Sturfer's next. Sturfer's on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. She was playing No Man's Sky last night, which was interesting. And then our good friend Omega supporting Extra Life. NICU monitors for Beaumont Children's Hospital. Make sure you support all the outlaws and all the good causes. I'm out of here. We're going to go raid Slackadelic. You guys have a good night, and I'll talk to you all later. Thank you, as always, for being here and for your generosity and support. And I love you all.
Be excellent to each other.